Lonely single mom drove a drunk CEO home, never expected he'd fall for her, change her life forever. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's go back to our main character. The rain was falling hard that night, painting the quiet streets of Chicago in silver streaks. The wipers on Ava Thompson's old Honda Civic squeaked with every swipe as she squinted through the windshield, exhaustion weighing heavy on her shoulders. It was past midnight. Her shift at the diner had ended 2 hours ago, but she'd stayed to clean up after a burst pipe flooded the kitchen. All she wanted now was to get home, check on her son, and maybe sleep 4 hours before the morning rush began again. The radio crackled softly, some old country song filling the silence. Then, in the distance, she saw him, a man stumbling near the curb outside a closed bar, his dress shirt clinging to his back, his steps uneven. Ava slowed down, her instincts warring with caution. She rolled the window down slightly, rain misting her face. "Hey, are you okay?" she called. The man looked up, his eyes unfocused, his jaw tight. "I'm fine," he slurred, then tripped over the curb. Ava sighed. Every part of her screamed to keep driving. She'd had enough trouble in her life. But something about the way he sat there, drenched, reminded her of her ex-husband the night before he left. Lost, hollow, inhuman. She pulled over, grabbed the small towel she kept in the passenger seat, and stepped out into the rain. "Sir, you can't stay here." "It's freezing," she said, wrapping the towel around his shoulders. He blinked at her, trying to focus. "You shouldn't help strangers," he muttered. "Yeah, well," she said, helping him to his feet. "You look like you're about to meet the sidewalk again." He chuckled weakly, the sound rough, almost embarrassed. "Where do you live?" she asked. He hesitated, pulled a wallet halfway out of his pocket, then dropped it. Inside, she caught a flash of a business card embossed with the words Times Coal Industries *. She frowned. "Ethan Cole," she read aloud. "That's you?" He gave a faint nod, leaning against her car. She opened the passenger door. "All right, Mr. Cole. You're lucky I'm not the kind who leaves people in the rain. Get in." He blinked at her again, as if trying to memorize her face, then slid inside. The car smelled faintly of coffee, and Crane's, her son's drawing pad, still lay on the back seat. As she started the engine, he whispered, "You have a kind heart. You know that?" Ava smiled tiredly. "Yeah, well, kindness doesn't pay rent, but it keeps me human." He laughed once, then leaned his head against the window, eyes fluttering shut. She drove through the storm, her hands gripping the wheel tight, unaware that the stranger beside her wasn't just some drunk man, but one of the most powerful CEOs in the city. By the time she dropped him off in front of a sleek glass building, her clothes were soaked through. "You sure you'll be okay?" she asked. He looked at her for a long moment, something soft flickering in his gaze. "No one ever waits for me," he murmured before stumbling inside. She watched him disappear, not knowing that this single act of kindness would soon turn her entire life upside down. The next morning, sunlight crept through the thin curtains of Ava's small apartment, landing on a stack of unpaid bills and a drawing taped to the fridge that read, "Me and Mommy." Her 6-year-old son, Noah, was already awake, sitting cross-legged on the couch with his cereal bowl. "You came home late again," he said sleepily. Ava kissed the top of his head and smiled. "I know, baby. Long shift, but guess what? I made enough in tips to buy pancakes this weekend." His face lit up as if that were the biggest victory in the world. It was small, but to Ava, every tiny promise meant survival. She packed his lunch, wrapped him in his faded jacket, and walked him to the bus stop, her shoes still damp from the storm the night before. As the bus disappeared, she leaned against the light pole, taking a breath she had not realized she was holding. She thought briefly of the man she had helped, the way his voice had slurred when he said, "No one ever waits for me." Probably just a lonely drunk, she told herself, shaking off the thought. By noon, she was back at the diner, tying her apron behind her waist. The smell of coffee and fried bacon filled the air. Her coworker, Linda, smirked. "You look like you wrestled with the weather and lost." Ava laughed. "Pretty much. Another 12-hour day. Let's go." Hours passed in the blur of orders, refills, and forced smiles. But when she reached into her coat pocket during a break, Her fingers brushed something smooth, the black tie she had found on the passenger seat. She pulled it out, the initials EC stitched in silver thread. She traced the letters absently. "Who are you, Mr. Cole?" she murmured. The next day, life went on as usual. Wake up, make breakfast, drop Noah at school, work, repeat. But on Friday evening, as she cleared the last table, her manager rushed in. "Ava, the catering team for the Cole Industries charity gala bailed last minute. They need experienced waitstaff. Pays triple. You in?" She hesitated. "Cole Industries? Yeah, big deal downtown. You could use the cash." She nodded, unaware that fate was pulling her back toward the man whose life she had accidentally touched. Saturday night, the ballroom shimmered under chandeliers. Ava stood among a line of servers, her uniform crisp, her nerves buzzing. It was a world far from her cracked apartment walls and second-hand clothes. As the music swelled, she balanced a tray of champagne flutes and wove through the crowd of executives and influencers. Then, a familiar voice filled the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for supporting the annual Cole Industries Foundation Gala." Her breath caught. She turned toward the stage. There he was, the man from the rain, now polished, confident, perfectly sober, standing under the spotlight in a tailored black suit. Ethan Cole. He looked nothing like the drenched stranger she had hauled into her car. The room erupted in applause, but Ava froze, her heart pounding. He continued, "This company was built on second chances. Tonight we celebrate the people who make them possible." His gaze swept across the crowd and for a brief, electric second, landed on her. Their eyes met. He blinked, almost imperceptibly, recognition dawning in his expression. Her tray trembled in her hands, one glass tipped, spilling golden liquid down her sleeve. She gasped softly and hurried toward the back hallway, cheeks burning. But before she could disappear, a voice stopped her. "Wait." She turned. Ethan stood a few feet away, disbelief softening his sharp features. "You," he said quietly. "It was you that night." She swallowed hard. "I was just helping someone who needed it." He smiled faintly, eyes kind. "Then you should know, I have not forgotten." For the first time in a long while, Ava did not know what to say. The man she thought she would never see again was standing before her, no longer a lost stranger in the rain, but the man whose world she had unknowingly changed with one simple act of kindness. For days after the gala, Ava tried to convince herself that their brief encounter had meant nothing, that a man like Ethan Cole probably forgot her the moment the lights dimmed. But deep down, she knew the way he had looked at her was not the look of a man who forgot easily. Monday morning came with the usual rush of noise and exhaustion. The diner buzzed with regulars and the hiss of coffee machines. Ava tied her apron and moved quickly between tables until Linda nudged her and whispered, "You have a visitor." Ava turned, expecting a customer, but froze when she saw Ethan standing at the door, dressed in a gray suit, rain droplets glistening on his shoulders. For a second, she thought she was imagining him. "Mr. Cole," she breathed, setting down her tray. Heads turned. Ethan smiled, polite but genuine. "I hope this is not a bad time. I wanted to return something." He held up a familiar black tie. Her eyes widened. "You left it in your car that night. I should have thanked you properly." She hesitated, lowering her voice. "You really did not need to come all the way here." "I did," he replied simply. "You helped me when you did not have to. Let me buy you coffee." The words felt surreal, like something out of another person's life. Minutes later, they sat in a quiet corner booth. Ava folded her hands to hide how they trembled. "You must think it was strange," she said softly. "A random woman pulling over for a drunk man in the rain." Ethan shook his head. "I think it was brave and rare." He studied her face, noticing the faint circles under her eyes, the quiet strength in her voice. "You work too hard." She laughed, embarrassed. "Single mom life. Bills do not pay themselves. You have a son? Noah, 6. He wants to be an astronaut, but I keep reminding him we do not even have a working toaster." Ethan chuckled, the sound low and warm. "Then he will fit right in at NASA." For the first time in months, Ava laughed freely. When their coffees were empty, Ethan checked his watch reluctantly. "Ava, I have an idea. Our foundation is launching a new outreach program helping single parents with job training and childcare support. We could use someone with empathy and real-world perspective. Would you consider working with us?" Ava blinked, stunned. "Me? I am not qualified for something like that." "You are more qualified than most," he said gently. "You understand struggle. That matters more than a degree." She wanted to believe him, but the voice of doubt whispered inside her head. People like him lived in penthouses. People like her counted tips to make rent. "I will think about it," she said finally. Ethan smiled and stood. "That is all I ask." As he left, several customers stared, whispering. Linda leaned over, eyes wide. "Girl, who was that?" Ava exhaled slowly. "Just someone who remembers kindness." That night, as she tucked Noah into bed, she caught herself staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the day. For the first time in years, the future did not look like an endless loop of exhaustion. It looked possible. 2 days later, an email arrived, an official offer from the Cole Foundation. Ava's hands shook as she read the words. Her starting role would be in community outreach, full benefits, flexible schedule. She stared at the screen, hardly breathing. Maybe fate had not forgotten her after all. The next morning, she walked into the gleaming glass lobby of Cole Industries, nerves buzzing. The receptionist smiled. "You must be Miss Thompson, Mr. Cole is expecting you." Ava followed her through hallways lined with modern art and soft white light. When Ethan appeared, he was holding 2 coffees. "Welcome to your first day," he said, handing one to her. She smiled nervously. "You really think I can do this?" "I would not have asked if I did not." And for the first time, standing in that tall building that once felt untouchable, Ava began to believe that maybe she could rewrite her story. The weeks that followed felt like stepping into a new world for Ava. The office at the Cole Foundation was bright, filled with sunlight and the hum of quiet purpose. Her days were no longer measured by diner shifts or late-night exhaustion, but by meetings, outreach calls, and helping real people, parents like her who needed a chance. Every morning, she arrived early, determined to prove she belonged. And every morning, Ethan was already there, coffee in hand, greeting her with that calm, steady smile. He never treated her like someone beneath him. Instead, he asked for her opinions, valued her instincts, and made her feel seen in a way she had almost forgotten how to feel. One afternoon, while reviewing project proposals, Ava noticed him standing by the window, his gaze lost in thought. "You look like a man solving world peace," she said lightly. Ethan turned, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Just trying to figure out how to keep our board from turning compassion into a spreadsheet." She chuckled. "Maybe they need to spend a day at one of the community centers." He nodded thoughtfully. "You know what? That is actually a good idea. Come with me tomorrow. I want you to see what your work is changing." The next day, they visited a neighborhood center on the south side, where single parents gathered for job training and support groups funded by the foundation. Ava watched mothers laugh with volunteers, fathers help kids with homework, and for a moment, she felt proud, like she had finally built something that mattered. Ethan walked beside her, sleeves rolled up, helping unload food donations. When one of the kids spilled juice on his shirt, he just laughed. Ava smiled at the sight. "You are not what I expected from a CEO," she said. "And what did you expect?" he asked. "A man too busy for people." He met her eyes, his voice quiet. "Once, I was. Until someone reminded me what it means to be seen." Her breath caught, realizing he meant her. The ride back was filled with easy silence, broken only by the soft sound of the city rolling by. That evening after work, Ethan walked her to her car. "You did great today," he said. "You connected with everyone there." "It felt right," she admitted. "Like I am finally doing something good." "You have been doing good all along, Ava. You just never got credit for it." For a moment, they stood there, the hum of the street fading into the background. Then his phone rang, shattering the stillness. He glanced at the screen, his expression tightening. "It is from my father's law firm," he muttered. "Excuse me." He stepped away, voice low, sharp, impatient. Ava could hear just enough to sense the weight of whatever he was hiding. When he returned, his face was unreadable. "Everything all right?" she asked. "Just business," he said, forcing a smile. "Go home, get some rest." She wanted to ask more, but the look in his eyes stopped her. Over the next few days, Ethan seemed distant. His calls were brief, his smiles distracted. The board was pressuring him over a corporate merger, and rumors whispered through the halls about investors losing patience. Ava worked quietly, focusing on her tasks, but she could feel the tension building like a storm. One Friday, she found him alone in the conference room, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened, staring at a stack of documents. "You need a break," she said gently. "I need a miracle," he murmured. "Maybe you already had one," she replied. He looked up at her then, something raw flickering behind his exhaustion. "You really think people like me get miracles?" "Yes," she said softly, "when they least expect them." He held her gaze for a long moment, then smiled faintly. "Thank you, Ava, for reminding me why I started all this in the first place." That night, as she drove home, Ava felt a warmth she could not name, a quiet certainty that their stories were no longer running parallel, but beginning to intertwine. Over the next few weeks, the distance between Ava and Ethan began to shrink in the quietest of ways. He started stopping by her desk with small things: a fresh cup of coffee, a new notebook, a quick question that turned into a 20-minute conversation. Their laughter filled the office, subtle but undeniable. One afternoon, as rain tapped gently against the tall glass windows, Ethan invited her to lunch. It was not at a fancy restaurant like she imagined. Instead, he drove them to a small family diner tucked in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place where the floor creaked and the air smelled of pancakes and maple syrup. "You come here often?" she asked, stirring her coffee. "Used to," he said, glancing at the booth beside them. "My mother loved this place. She said success means nothing if you forget how to sit down and eat with regular people." Ava smiled softly. "Smart woman." "She was," he replied quietly. "She passed away when I was 26. After that, I threw myself into work, building the company, chasing every deal. Somewhere along the way, I stopped being someone she would be proud of." Ava studied him, the way his hands tightened around the cup. "I think she would be proud of the man who built a foundation that helps families. Proud of the man sitting here, right now." Ethan looked up, a slow smile breaking through the weight of his memories. "You always know what to say, Ava." "That is because I have been on both sides," she said. "The person who needs help and the one who finally gets to give it." For a moment, silence hung between them, comfortable, unspoken, full of meaning. After lunch, they walked outside. The rain had stopped, leaving the pavement shining like glass. Ethan offered her his coat as a cool breeze swept by. "You do not have to," she said, but he draped it over her shoulders anyway. "I insist," he replied. "It suits you." The warmth of his gesture made her heart ache in a way she could not define. That evening, Ava returned home to find Noah drawing on the living room floor. "You are home early," he said excitedly. "Mr. Cole let me leave before the storm," she replied, ruffling his hair. "He sounds nice," Noah said. "He is," she murmured, almost to herself. Later that week, the foundation hosted a small press conference to announce a new initiative. Reporters crowded the lobby, cameras flashing. Ethan stood at the podium, poised and composed, with Ava assisting behind the scenes. When one of the reporters asked about the inspiration behind the new program, Ethan paused. "A woman reminded me," he said, his voice steady, "that kindness does not come from status. It comes from empathy." The audience clapped, unaware that his eyes had drifted toward Ava. But not everyone saw that moment with warmth. The next morning, whispers began to ripple through the office gossip about Ava, about how she had caught the boss's attention, about how lucky she must be. By noon, she could feel the judgment in every glance. At lunch, Linda called her. "You are on social media, Ava. Someone posted your picture from the gala with Ethan. They are saying you are having an affair with the CEO." Ava's stomach dropped. "That is not true," she said, voice shaking. "Of course it is not," Linda replied. "But the internet does not care about truth." By evening, the comments had spread like wildfire. When Ava walked out of the office, photographers waited by the gates. She rushed past them, heart pounding. Moments later, Ethan appeared beside her car. "Ava," he said firmly, "get in. I will handle this." She turned, tears stinging her eyes. "Handle it? You cannot just fix gossip, Ethan. I do not want to be your charity case or your scandal." "You are neither," he said, frustration and care colliding in his voice. "You are the best thing that has happened to this place." "Then why does it feel like I am the one paying for it?" she whispered. She got into her car and drove off, leaving him standing in the rain, the same way she had once found him. The next few days were the hardest Ava had faced since the night she met Ethan. The headlines would not stop. CEO's secret romance and waitress-turned-foundation favorite were plastered across gossip sites. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from people she barely knew, some sympathetic, others cruel. By Tuesday morning, she could not take it anymore. She resigned. She left a simple note on her desk that read, "Thank you for believing in me." Then she walked out of the building without looking back. That night, she sat on the couch with Noah asleep beside her, scrolling through the comments that tore at her dignity. Her hands trembled. She had worked so hard to prove she belonged, only to be reduced to a rumor. A soft knock on her door startled her. When she opened it, Ethan stood there, rain dripping from his hair just like the first night they met. "Ava, please let me explain," he said. She shook her head. "You have done enough. They think I am with you because I wanted something. You know how that feels? To be looked at like I do not deserve any of it?" "That is not true," he said firmly. "I told them the truth. I told them you saved me that night, that you are the reason I started the foundation again." "Then you made it worse," she whispered. "You turned me into a story." Ethan's expression softened. "Then let me fix it the right way." "You cannot fix this with money or power, Ethan. You cannot buy back trust." She closed the door before he could answer. For the next few days, silence settled like fog. Ethan stayed away, throwing himself into work. Yet every decision, every meeting felt empty. The foundation lost sponsors who feared the scandal. Board members began to question his leadership, but Ethan refused to let them turn kindness into shame. At the next board meeting, he stood before the long table, his voice steady. "If we start treating compassion like a liability, then we have already failed. The woman you all call a distraction built the very heart of this foundation, and I will not let you erase her." Cameras flashed as the statement spread. News outlets shifted tone from scandal to story of redemption, but Ava did not know any of that yet. She was working late one evening at a small community kitchen, trying to keep her mind off things, when a group of volunteers entered carrying boxes marked with the Cole Foundation logo. "We are relaunching the outreach program," one of them said cheerfully. Apparently the CEO made it his mission to expand it. Ava froze. Her heart raced as she helped unload supplies, recognizing Ethan's handwriting on one of the thank you cards inside. "To those who remind the world that kindness still matters." The next morning, she found herself standing outside the foundation again, staring at the tall glass building she once feared. Inside, Ethan was in the lobby, talking to reporters about the new initiative. When he saw her, his words faltered. "Ava," he breathed. "You should be inside," she said quietly. "This is your moment." "No," he said, walking toward her. "This is ours." "Ethan," she began. "I left because I did not want to be the reason your reputation fell apart." "You were never the reason things fell apart," he said softly. "You were the reason I finally built something worth protecting." For a long moment, they stood there in the morning light, the city humming around them. "I am sorry," he said finally. "Not for what they said, but for not fighting harder for you sooner." Ava took a slow breath, feeling the heaviness in her chest ease just a little. "Then maybe," she said, "you should start now." He smiled faintly, a mix of relief and longing in his eyes. "I plan to." And as he reached out, not to pull her close, but simply to take her hand, Ava realized that sometimes redemption did not arrive with grand gestures, but with a quiet promise kept in the rain. The following weeks were quiet but different. Ava returned to the foundation, not as a symbol of controversy, but as a partner in rebuilding. The world's noise had faded, replaced by something steadier respect. She noticed the change in how people looked at her now, not as the woman from the headlines, but as the one who had stood her ground with grace. Ethan, though busier than ever, made time for her every day. They worked side by side, late into the evenings, crafting new outreach plans and restoring the trust that had once been shaken. Yet beneath the rhythm of their days, something unspoken pulsed between them, stronger than friendship, gentler than the fire of romance. One night, after a long board meeting, they stepped out onto the rooftop terrace. The city spread beneath them, glowing like a field of stars. "It feels strange," Ava said softly, resting her hands on the cold metal railing. "A year ago, I was serving coffee and praying for rent money. Now I am here." Ethan smiled. "You earned it. Every piece of it." "Sometimes I still feel like I do not belong in your world," she admitted. "Then make it your world too," he said. "You already changed mine." She turned to him, the wind catching her hair. "Ethan, you do not have to say things like that." "I do not say things I do not mean," he replied quietly. For a moment, the air between them thickened with words left unsaid. Then his phone buzzed. He sighed and stepped aside to answer. Ava turned back to the city, pretending not to hear, but the tone of his voice made her glance over. "I told you not to call me again," he said sharply. "The deal is off." His jaw tightened. "No, I will not use the foundation's funds. Find another investor." He hung up and caught her watching. "You heard that?" "Enough," she said. "You are being blackmailed?" Ethan hesitated, then nodded. "A former partner. He threatened to expose private financial documents if I did not agree to his merger. It could destroy everything." "You cannot let him control you like that," Ava said, stepping closer. "You built this company from the ground up, and I could lose it just as fast," he admitted. "One mistake, and people will believe anything they read." "Then tell the truth before he does," she said. "You told me once that compassion is not a liability, neither is honesty." He looked at her, something like resolve flickering in his eyes. The next morning, Ethan held a press conference. Cameras filled the room as he stood at the podium, Ava at his side. "There have been questions about the future of coal industries," he began. "So here is the truth. Years ago, I made decisions driven by fear and ambition, not heart. But the woman standing beside me reminded me that a company, like a person, can change. We choose integrity over intimidation, transparency over silence." The crowd murmured, flashes of cameras sparking like lightning. Afterward, as reporters swarmed, Ava stayed quiet beside him, her presence speaking louder than words. That night, they returned to the office, the adrenaline still humming. Ethan leaned against his desk, exhausted but lighter. "You were right," he said. "Honesty does not ruin you, it frees you." Ava smiled faintly. "Told you," he chuckled. "You always do." A pause lingered. "You know," he continued, "when I first met you, I thought you were saving me. But now I realize we saved each other." She looked up, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then maybe that is what real love looks like." He stepped closer, close enough for her to feel the warmth of his breath, yet gentle enough to let her choose the space between them. "If it is," he said, "then I do not want anything else." And for the first time since that stormy night when their paths crossed, neither of them felt like they were rescuing anyone. They were finally standing as equals, side by side, in the quiet miracle they had built together. Months passed, and the storm that had once surrounded Ava and Ethan slowly faded into a distant echo. The Coal Foundation was thriving again, stronger than before. Their new transparency campaign inspired other companies to follow suit, and the world began to see Ethan not as a scandal-driven executive, but as a man who had rebuilt his empire on truth and compassion. For Ava, life had settled into something she never thought she would have: a rhythm of peace. Every morning she walked Noah to school, holding his small hand as he chattered about rockets and stars. Every afternoon, she returned to the foundation, her name now listed on the leadership board beside Ethan's. She had earned her place not through pity or luck, but through perseverance. Yet deep inside, something tender still lingered, a question neither she nor Ethan had dared to voice. One Friday evening, the foundation hosted its annual gala. The ballroom shimmered with soft lights, the hum of conversation floating through the air. It was the same hall where they had first locked eyes months ago, though everything about the night felt different now. Ava stood near the edge of the crowd in a simple navy dress, watching as donors mingled. Her heart raced when Ethan approached, dressed in a classic black tuxedo. "You clean up well," she teased. He smiled. "So do you." "I was afraid you would not come tonight. I could not miss the event that funds half our programs," she said lightly, but her voice trembled just enough for him to notice. He offered his arm. "Dance with me?" "Ethan, everyone is watching," she said, glancing around. "Let them," he replied simply. The music swelled, slow and melodic. As they moved across the floor, the rest of the room blurred into insignificance. Ava looked up at him, her eyes shimmering under the golden light. "Do you ever think about that night?" she asked softly. "Every day," he said. "It was the night I stopped feeling alone." She smiled faintly. "You were drunk." "Maybe," he admitted, "but you still saw me when no one else did." When the song ended, applause rippled through the room, but neither of them moved. Then, as the host took the stage to thank donors, Ethan stepped forward. "Before we close tonight," he said, his voice carrying across the hall, "I want to acknowledge someone who changed not just my life, but the heart of this foundation. The spotlight followed him as he reached into his jacket pocket. "Ava Thompson," he continued, "you once told me kindness cannot be bought or built. It must be lived. You reminded me what that means. And because of you, thousands of families now have second chances. But there is one person left who deserves one." Gasps and murmurs filled the room as he turned toward her. "Ava, I do not just want to thank you. I want to share my life with you." Her eyes widened as he knelt on one knee, holding a small velvet box. "You once gave me a ride home," he said with a soft smile. "Now I am asking if you will be my home." The entire room fell silent. Ava covered her mouth, tears welling up. "Ethan," she whispered, "are you sure?" "More sure than I have ever been about anything," he said. She nodded through her tears, and the hall erupted in applause. Ethan stood and pulled her into his arms as flashes of cameras burst like stars. Somewhere in the crowd, Noah clapped proudly beside Linda, who wiped her eyes. That night, as the city lights glimmered outside the tall windows, Ava realized something simple and extraordinary. The woman who once drove through the rain just to help a stranger had found not only love, but also the proof that compassion, when given freely, always finds its way back home. Spring arrived quietly in the city, bringing with it the scent of rain and blooming dogwoods that lined the streets outside Ava and Ethan's new home. It was a modest two-story house on the edge of the city, far from the glass towers and flashing lights that once defined Ethan's world. He had insisted on that. "I wanted a place that feels real," he said when they first moved in. Ava smiled at the memory as she stood by the kitchen window, watching Noah chase their golden retriever across the backyard. The laughter drifting through the open door felt like the sound of peace. Life had changed, but in the best possible ways. After their engagement, the Foundation's story had gone viral, a tale of redemption and kindness that inspired millions. Instead of scandal, people now spoke of transformation. Donations poured in, new centers opened across the country, and Ethan often credited Ava publicly as the heart behind every change. But what mattered most to her was not fame or recognition. It was the quiet mornings, the smell of pancakes, and the sight of her son finally sleeping without worry. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting everything in gold, Ethan walked into the kitchen with a tired grin. "Board meeting survived," he said, dropping his briefcase. "How did it go?" Ava asked, drying her hands. "Better than expected. We approved the new grant for single-parent housing projects. I think you would have been proud," she smiled. "I am already proud." He leaned against the counter, studying her. "You know, I used to think success was about the next deal, the next number. But now I realize it is about moments like this." She reached up to touch his cheek. "That is because you finally learned to stop running." "No," he said softly, taking her hand. "It is because I finally found something worth standing still for." Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, a soft echo of the storm that had once brought them together. Later that night, after Noah had fallen asleep, they sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket, the rain beginning to fall gently around them. "Do you ever think about that night?" Ava asked. "All the time," Ethan said. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if you had just driven past. I probably would have ended up reading about you in the papers," she teased. "Drunk CEO found asleep in the rain." He laughed, the sound low and warm. "Or maybe fate would have found another way to bring us together." "Maybe," she said. "But I like this version better." He turned to her, his voice quiet. "You saved me that night, Ava, and not just from the rain." "You saved me too," she whispered. "You gave me back my hope." They sat in silence, listening to the steady rhythm of the rain. After a moment, Ethan pulled something from his pocket, a folded piece of fabric. "Do you remember this?" She blinked in surprise. It was the same black tie she had found on her passenger seat all those months ago, now stitched neatly with a small silver heart beside the initials EC. "I thought it was only fair to return it one last time," he said, smiling. "It brought us together." She laughed softly, tears in her eyes. "Then maybe we should keep it forever." He nodded and slipped his arm around her shoulders. "Deal." The rain grew heavier, drumming against the roof, but neither of them moved. The woman who once struggled to make rent and the man who once believed he had everything but love sat together under the storm that had once been their beginning. And as lightning flashed softly across the sky, Ava whispered the words that had lived in her heart since that night long ago. "Sometimes the road home begins with a stranger in the rain." Ethan smiled, pressing his forehead against hers. "And ends," he said, "with the love that stranger gave back."